So, have you ever told your friends about playing MKDX online competitively? Chances are, if you're above 18 and out of high school, you've learned to not give a fuck anymore and have at one point or another. And a surprising amount of people think it's kind of a cool hobby, but they don't know how it works. And I mean, that's normal. So, people think about MK and how to play it in competitions. And lots of times, like, their first question is like, how does that work? Do you like turn off the items? And like, maybe you've watched MK World Cup at one point or another, which is like generally advertised out in the community, so like some new people are drawn in, and there's always that one guy who just posts in the chat really rudely, oh well, why is there items, or and like something along those lines. Well, this is your video to show the we'll answer that question, I guess. So let's get right into it. So it's crazy to think about this claim. So let's say there's two options for a competitive game. One has RNG and one has next to none. So the claim here is that the one with RNG is more skill based. So like, that sounds crazy. Like, I know already we're like less than a minute in, and I've already got people still thinking, but dude, I got double redded out of first 5 times in a war yesterday, or I take all the blues, or what part of shock dodging is skill. But you have to bear with me on this one, and I'll attempt to explain why we traditionally always run tournaments with items on. So to start off, there's like a really huge, and I mean huge, misconception that lines are equivalent to skill in our current community. Having good lines is a skill for sure, but it's not everything, or even close to everything. So to begin with, let's think about if we ran our tournaments without items. Would the best time trialers always win? Considering the best TTers in the world are only a few seconds faster overall than like the other players, would that be enough to let them pull away without being drafted or bumped or pushed around? Would the person starting at first always win because they can steal everyone's coins early? Would they even need to have better lines if they got the coins first? If we turned off coins, would everyone practically playing at 100cc speed even be enjoyable? Now let's consider this. What defines the best time trialer to begin with? Who would you say is better? The person with the most world records, or the person with the better overall timesheet? Or, and consider this, if someone spent 50 hours obtaining 4 world records, would that be a more impressive achievement than somebody who only has 3 but spent only 25 hours? Additionally, in online format, would someone with world record potential be better than someone with average lines who never messes up? Because we know that every world record requires a ton of restarts, so sure, lines matter, but are they the only skill? And because even in a potential itemless setting, consistency is a huge skill as well as stuff like drafting and managing bumps, I guess. Like, that means that lines is not even the only skill in an itemless meta. Now, all of these things aren't even the main thing I'm going to address in this video, but I wanted to get people thinking first about how important lines really are. So here's the main thing about lines. They can be memorized. They are a skill, but if they were the only thing that mattered, our game would be vastly different to almost every competitive game ever. So let's take a look at Smash. Doesn't matter which one, a game series most of us are pretty familiar with. Competitive Smash is played without items. So you may think, what's different here? Items clearly make it less skill based, so should it not be the same with MK? Now, the thing is, Smash and MK are very different games is the answer. The goals are very different in each. The overall goal of Smash is generally to take X amount of stocks from your opponent. With MK, the goal is to finish each race with faster times than the rest of the room. So here's why it's so different. In Smash Bros, your entire goal is focused around what your opponent is doing at all times. You have to attack and hit the opponent, you move around to not get hit by them, and so on. And this is a common theme with many other games and Pokemon battles. Your goal is to outwit your opponent by putting them at a disadvantage, like a type mismatch. All of your moves are based off of counterplaying them. In Splatoon, there's many objectives, but there's one constant, and it's that you need to get past or splat the enemy team to infiltrate their territory. So what's different with MK? The goal of MK is to finish the race as fast as possible, and it is quite possible that you have absolutely no interaction with your opponents at all in any given race because the goal is to just drive fast. And the lack of interaction with opponents is only amplified with items turned off. So what exactly does this mean? It means you literally don't have to think. You would just do the same thing every time you play. You just try to be fast, your lines are more or less memorized, so there is nothing to think about. You just regurgitate lines that you've memorized and hope that you do it better than everybody else. So, but at this point, like, you might as well just play time trial, because it's like your opponents aren't even there, and at best, they're just annoyances that you sometimes bump into without items. So the addition of items may mean the addition of RNG, but what does it add also is, well, I'd say multiple new layers to a meta that would quite literally be completely one-dimensional otherwise. So in Smash, your objective is to hit your opponent and not get hit yourself, but how exactly does this work? Well, it's a mental game. Decision making, you attempt to outwit your opponent and make a read perhaps. In Pokemon battles, you outwit your opponents by maybe switching your Pokemon out, or even not switching them out when they think you will. Like, there's a lot of mind games that go on, and the second you add something like items to MK, that's when you add decision making to the game. And decision making, like lines, is a skill, but it's a significantly deeper concept, and yes, it's harder to master because there won't be an obvious answer to many things. Sometimes you'll have to quickly predict the risk of doing an action and think if the risk is worth the potential reward. Maybe it's not safe to throw a red shell at first, but maybe it's the last race of an FFA and the guy in first is only 2 points behind you and can steal your spot in advancing to the next round. So sometimes different scenarios are like have different worth. Like, is it worth it? And just knowing the answer to that question better than everybody else is a huge skill. And this is stuff you'll have to think about. And knowing the answer is much more difficult than just, oh, we have to get a UMT instead of an SMT on this turn because that's what the world record does. So essentially, if items were off, there'd almost always be an obvious optimal play, which would just be your racing line. And when you have something that's more open-ended, you have to choose between options, and consistently knowing which one will lead to better results is extremely skill-based. Now, if tournaments ran with no items, I'm not denying that perhaps results would have less variance. But here's another claim. Less variance does not mean it's necessarily a more skill-based format. So let's take this analogy for example. If the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball team had an inter-team 3-point shooting contest, I'd put my money on Kyle Korver to win this contest almost every time. He is one of the most accurate, if not the most accurate 3-point shooter in NBA history, and he's extremely skilled at the shot. But 3-point shooting is only one facet of basketball, and it doesn't take a genius to know that LeBron James is by far the most skilled basketball player on the Cavaliers. Korver is also a way better 3-throw shooter than LeBron, but a 3-throw is just like a time trial. It's a complete solo activity, and while it's a good skill to have for any basketball player, it's not everything. There's defense, rebounding, passing, short-range shots. It all matters also, and all those aspects put you directly against your opposition. So at the end of the day, TTs are like only really one facet of our metagame. And while it's an important skill, there's plenty of others that you have to have also, and the existence of items create those skills that you have to have. And with more skills on the table, I would say that it would make it for a more skill-based meta. So in short, items being on make you have to think a ton more. It may seem that if the same player wins almost all the time, that is the most skill-based format, but remember this, if something is nearly impossible to always win at, it makes the skill ceiling that much harder to reach. It means that truly being perfect is an almost impossible task, and it really goes to show how in some games like MK or even something like poker, even winning 80% of your games can be an extremely impressive task. And of course, this is a good thing even because competition feels like it has purpose if it seems that the champion is never a lock at the beginning. So it makes things less boring. So at this point, I've pretty much said that items deepen the game and raise the skill ceiling because it adds a ton of new factors and creates more complex scenarios that you have to adapt to. But I did address that it does create RNG. So while it's not my main focus of the video, there's even more you can do to try to negate RNG a little bit. So Increasing the amount of races per event is one of them, which is why we generally play 12 matches instead of 4 or even 1. Of course, there's also playing in teams in a free-for-all room. Let's say 6 players got good RNG and 6 players got bad RNG in a race. Then perhaps 6 players were lucky and 6 players were unlucky. Now, if we play the event in 2 teams of 6, let's say again that 6 players got lucky and 6 got unlucky. The odds of the 6 unlucky players all being on the same team is only 1 in 64, though. The most likely scenario mathematically is that 3 players got good RNG per team, and in races like these, it's like luck was completely negated between the 2 teams. Of course, it's still possible to have even races, but then you have to take into account it's possible to have uneven races, but you have to take into account that there's 12 races, and of course if you flip a coin 12 times, it's most likely to be at 6-6. Perhaps in a scenario like this, you get 3 lucky races, 3 unlucky races, and 6 close even ones, so at the end of the day, RNG is still present, but odds are overwhelmingly in your favor to have even luck between teams in a war. And it's not that bad in other formats as well, I would say. Now, I know it's a broad example that I just gave, but things aren't that I know that things also aren't that simple in an actual event, but probability will still apply. Like, it still has the same principle to that. That's just a simplistic example, but it still applies to many complex scenarios. So another thing to consider is that even more elements of skill are added when playing in teams. So like even more skill elements are created, like communication, team play, even synergy or strats for full teams on tracks. And at the end of the day, RNG really isn't that relevant to begin with because there's so much cancellation and skill-based strategies happening. And if it's not that relevant to begin with, that should be all the more reason to see why items are a good thing for our competitive game, because it adds more mental game to our competitions without the hazard effects of RNG being all that relevant. So I'm not saying RNG is never a factor, but I think people like to blame it instead of themselves way more than they should be. So a lot of people overlook things like, wow, it's unlucky that they pulled 2 reds there when I had 2 defense, but like, what if they had 2 defense items and tried to backspam them with 1? Like, it'd be their fault then. Another thing that people may not consider is, while it may seem unlucky to get double redded out of first in wars, it could depend on the scenario. Like, if you are holding down first and the opponents have 2nd through 5th, is it actually unlucky that they pulled double reds on you? Because it may not be. It may just be in their favor, because what you have to consider is that your team is in a disadvantaged state, and that 2nd place can chuck reds without punishment because their teammates are behind you. They could let 3rd pass maybe. The odds of you being redded in first increase dramatically because you are in a state of disadvantage to begin with. I'd argue it'd be more lucky to not get hit out of it and get hit out of first in that scenario. While it may be infuriating to you, was it actually unlucky for that to happen to the team? Because what if like 3 of your teammates are in the pack and they got hit by a bomb snipe? Like, that's a skillful transaction by the opponents. Then the other team would in fact deserve to be in the higher spots already, meaning they would naturally have higher odds of pulling reds because they made the plays to get behind you to begin with. It's something to consider. I may talk about the concept of luck in another video way down the road, but for now I think I've made my point for the day. So that's all I got for now. Sorry for the wait on this video. You can still expect a decent amount of these Rook views in the next 2 months, closing out summer, but the rate of production will be going down significantly once the school year starts again, so I want to alert you guys all on that. It's my last year of college and definitely my hardest, so I'll have to limit my time significantly again, and I'm already planning on a pretty big MK Deluxe project now that's taking up a decent amount of my time, but it's something I feel that I should be focusing on even over these videos, but perhaps I'll share my future plans with you guys soon. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.